Welcome to Meno Musings, our monthly podcast where we get guests along to talk about topics related to the menopause. And this month, we're going to be talking about menopause and ADHD. And what I found when I started looking into this topic was that there was a lot of information on menopause, and you could find decent information on ADHD. But what was really difficult to find was information and actually any real studies on those going through menopause and living with ADHD and the impact of those and the interaction of those. So I think it's really important that in today's podcast, we raise awareness of this. And I'm really grateful to be joined today by Dr. Susan Varghese. And Susan has over 20 years experience working extensively in internal medicine, general practice and corporate wellness, and has a special interest in women's health, and particularly in menopause and ADHD. And she provides an ADHD menopause coaching and advisory service to women navigating both menopause or hormone changes and ADHD, using very much an evidence-based, holistic lifestyle approach. And Susan has had an international upbringing. She's lived in Dubai, Asia, and Europe, and works with coaching clients all over the world. Welcome to Meno Musings, Dr. Varghese.
Thank you very much, Meredith, for the lovely introduction, and thank you for having me on this Meno Musings.
Well, let's dive straight in. So I think a really good place to start is perhaps just to explain what is ADHD and what is the impact on ADHD as women move into perimenopause and start to experience these hormone fluctuations.
Okay. ADHD is more of a neurodevelopmental disorder, and ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And the main reason why, a lot of women are talking about ADHD, or a lot of people are talking about menopause and ADHD, or the other way around, is because of the fact that women who are in menopause and ADHD women in menopause as well might experience very similar symptoms. So, as you know, a lot of women who are in perimenopause or menopause know, along with the kind of hot flushes and night sweats, which are the classic kind of vasomotor symptoms we look at, there's also the cognitive symptoms of menopause, which are to do with the brain. And the cognitive symptoms of menopause and the cognitive symptoms of ADHD, there's an overlap in 5 of the symptoms in both these group of women. And so, you're mainly looking at the three triad of symptoms of ADHD to start with. So it would be the inattention, the second one would be the impulsivity, the third would be the hyperactivity, and then you have things like the brain fog. Classically, a lot of women going through perimenopause or menopause explain, or it could be even kind of memory and kind of mood changes. So when you have, two things which can cause an overlap in how they present as cognitive symptoms, the woman in that age group in their midlife, they don't know, okay, are my symptoms due to ADHD or due to menopause? And the interesting fact is women who are in perimenopause or menopause who have never been diagnosed with ADHD before, or who've never, because it's something that normally starts in childhood. It might not be picked up until later on in life, because you see classically, when we don't have much training on ADHD as GPs or as medical doctors in the UK. And classically, someone with ADHD, you're taught to recognize as this kind of hyperactive, restless boy in school.
Yeah.
So for doctors, for clinicians, they would recognize that. But ADHD in girls, and more importantly, ADHD in women, present very differently, because a lot of them tend to have more of the inattention or the combined type of ADHD. So the 2 ways it can present is you can get women who are already diagnosed with ADHD, the symptoms get worse in perimenopause or menopause, or menopausal or perimenopausal women in their midlives find that a lot of possible ADHD symptoms become unmasked. Okay, so these symptoms have been latent or been hidden somewhere, but they become really unmasked and the whole thing starts to unravel in their midlives. Also, coincidentally, it could be the time, because there's usually a familial element to the ADHD, it could be also be the time when the young kids are getting diagnosed with ADHD, and then someone, or the children specialist or clinician asks the mother the question, do you have ADHD? So, that's when the question is brought to the forefront to this woman. And like, I don't know if I have ADHD. I don't know. I mean, some of the symptoms are the same. So maybe I do have ADHD. So I think that's when the whole conversation kind of topic becomes hot because no one knows the answer. The answer is it could be both, or it could be one or the other. But I would probably say in most cases there could be a likelihood of both, especially if there's a familial element to it and there's a family history of it.
Yeah. So it's really interesting, isn't it? So we know that there are many women, like you say, who go into perimenopause, and they don't realize that perhaps they've been living with ADHD for quite a few years at that point. So are there particular indicators, because the symptoms are similar, as you were saying? So what might give a sign or an indication for someone that actually it's more than just menopause here, and that they might want to look a little bit deeper to get, the appropriate support that they need for their well-being?
I mean, for someone to be diagnosed with ADHD, they use what we call as the DSM-5 criteria to diagnose a man, a woman, a boy, a girl with ADHD. And for ADHD to be diagnosed, the symptoms need to have started in childhood. So when you look back at history, so it would be useful, say, for example, talking to your parents if they're still around, or it could be school friends that you grew up with or went to school with. And, in women, so if you look at ADHD girl, for example, what were you like in school? Some girls have become really talkative because they're anxious and nervous, and that ADHD, that impulsivity and that hyperactivity, rather than being kind of aggressive like a, ADHD boy or becoming really hyperactive in girls, it could be talking too fast, it could be talking a lot, it could be oversharing, for example, or it could be that inattention where, they didn't do that well in school, or they were kind of completely distracted. They would be probably hopping from one topic to the other very quickly because of that inattention. So, there's a few different things that if you look back historically to your childhood, that could have, people might have told, teachers might have said, what, she's so talkative, or she's, she can't keep still in class, for example, or she's always kind of moving from one hobby to another. So it's kind of, because they become very restless. ADHD is a very interest-based thing. So if you're interested in something, you do really well in it. If you're not interested, you become really bored. So getting bored very easily. And also, the concept of time. So, you're running late for things. So, ADHD girls, they're probably getting to school late, they're missing deadlines or homework. So, there's kind of pointers when you look back, like with anything, it's easier connecting the dots looking backward. But for an actual formal diagnosis of ADHD, you need to have the symptoms starting from childhood, not starting in adulthood. So that would give an indication, okay, that's possibly looking at ADHD. But when you go for a diagnosis, it's a very comprehensive assessment. They will look at the historical kind of data, and also they would need supporting or collaborating information from parents or kind of childhood friends as well to kind of corroborate the history. And
so it almost
that's
sounds
how you
like just taking a moment, doesn't it? And just perhaps reflecting on some of the things you've said there and thinking, does some of those resonate with me if I look back on my childhood years? And if they do, then it may be that that's an indication, and then it's worth having a further conversation with a health professional to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think which is why, there's been a exponential rise in women, kind of perimenopausal or midlife women thinking they have ADHD, and a lot of diagnoses, and you can see a lot of news in the media, or women with ADHD getting really bad in menopause. And the reason I think is, post-pandemic or during the pandemic, they were homeschooling their kids, they were working from home. So they had that time to do that reflection, what you were saying. So they reflect back on, what was I like as a kid? Or have I always been like this? When you're on the kind of this treadmill, so to speak, 9 to 5 job, Monday to Friday, you're at work, you don't have time to sit back. But the pandemic, people had that time to sit back and reflect on, and all these things were magnified to a huge extent. So these things became more apparent, and it was probably unmasked like I was saying.
Yeah. And so for those who are going through perimenopause and, living with ADHD, what can they be thinking about and doing to support their well-being and manage their symptoms during this time?
I mean, I think the awareness is first and foremost because, I think it's all about knowing who you are as a woman. And, the way I say it is like your ADHD brand of brain. So if you know what your brain is like, how it functions, what does it do, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses? I mean, you can't really, the main thing is to focus on your strengths, but there are weaknesses which you can probably do things to kind of tackle or delegate. It could be things like that. But I think a lot of the things with the ADHD and women is, there is that there's something called RSD or rejection sensitive dysphoria. So women with ADHD, they perceive rejection much more harshly. So they're very sensitive to criticism. So if you look at workplace, for example, and they get criticized by their line manager or their boss or their colleagues, it could be the slightest thing. And and women, I find, in the midlife, because of the hormonal kind of overwhelm as well, they are kind of sensitive anyway. And then on top of that, if you have rejection sensitivity, you're going to take things very personally. Maybe when you were 20 or 30, you might not have, but maybe in your 40s, it's different. And then you might think, my line manager doesn't like me, they're going to overlook me for a promotion or, for a pay rise or whatever it is. And also the thing with ADHD is emotional dysregulation because of the dopamine effect in the brain. The emotions are going to be regulated very problematically. So the mood swings, kind of the emotional outbursts, those kind of things. Time blindness is a big one. There's this concept where, women with ADHD, I mean, it's not just women, but ADHD people, they don't realize what time is. So time can fly very quickly, or they have that feeling like, okay, they think they have enough time, but they are kind of lastminute.com people. And, I'm probably the same. So I kind of totally relate to it. But, that whole, so they end up missing kind of work deadlines, so assignments or projects. And then, that's going to cause problems with kind of productivity at work. Their colleagues are not going to like them because people think or label you as lazy rather than, these are things that you're kind of working with. And shame is a huge part, I find, especially, if you're being very different, because you see women or girls with ADHD, they feel they've always never fitted in anywhere, not fitted in at school, not fitted in a kind of group with friends, not fitted in at work. So the shame is really high, and the more they don't talk about it, they tend to internalize the shame. And then they're shamed. I mean, women with perimenopause, they're shamed if they're having hot flushes at work, for example, but you can imagine this is completely on a different level when the brain is also not working as well. There's brain fog, they can't think clearly, or they've kind of forgotten names, they're on the stage, or they could be talking in a meeting. It's like, sorry, what was your name again? It's that kind of small things that they're really embarrassed, and the shame gets to it. So I think being aware of these things, there is the rejection sensitivity, there's that overwhelm, there's that emotional dysregulation, there's that shame factor, all the time blindness. So once you're aware, you factor in for these things. So instead of saying, it'll take me 20 minutes to do that thing, you probably set aside 40 minutes because you think you're going to run late, or I've got a deadline in a week. I don't do it on the Saturday or the Sunday before the Monday it's due. You probably leave a bit more time, or if you're running late, you'll tell your line manager colleagues, what, I'm running a bit late. So you're preparing them. It's that kind of anticipation that you give it to them, because otherwise, women, because they're ashamed, they don't tell these things, and the person on the other side takes everything personally as well. So they're like, okay, you're disrespectful at work, she's always running late, she's got 101 excuses. That's not good. And you're probably going to shoot yourself in the foot. So I think knowing yourself well is probably the starting point, but it's a journey, like with anything else, so it's going to take time.
I think that's really important, isn't it? That knowing yourself well piece, actually. And I think we talk about a lot with just menopause as well, actually, and knowing your own body and what's going on. But particularly in this case, isn't it? It's knowing your own self, knowing your limits, knowing what you need to maybe put in place that will help
Yeah,
you manage
exactly.
things better. And I
Yeah,
like that piece about, if you feel comfortable doing so, being able to talk about it actually and let people know, look, I'm
exactly.
going to need a bit more time for this, or I might be late for this, and actually raise their awareness and the awareness of those that you work. And I think that brings us nicely to the workplace actually.
Mm,
And we know that a lot of women are in work, a lot of menopausal women
mm,
are
mm,
in work. So what
mm,
can workplaces be
mm.
doing to support those who are going through menopause and who have ADHD?
Yeah. I mean, if you've been formally diagnosed with ADHD, there's something called workplace adjustments, and the clinician or the psychiatrist diagnosing you with ADHD can provide that workplace adjustment letter. Or
Yeah.
if you're at university, or, I get a lot of clients like they're doing their PhD, they might be in their 40s or 50s, but they're doing PhDs. But, you're asking for allowances or adjustments to be made to kind of help you complete X, Y, Z, or these are the factors that you put in place. And I think if there are compassionate, again, it's not a very well known topic, so I don't know how much HR would be aware. But it's like having a menopause coach, in your workplace, or someone who, it's like a first aider. So you would have a mental health first aider. If you had someone who had some awareness of it, the woman, who's in that situation would probably feel comfortable going and telling them, what, these are the struggles, maybe I don't know, I could work from home on Mondays and Fridays because, I don't sleep very well on Sunday, or I don't know, whatever it is. Because you see, ADHD women, they find transitions very difficult. They can do one thing well. So, if they're at home, they can do well. And then to get kickstart your Monday routine may be a bit, troublesome. So you might be saying, what, I'll come into the office, especially with a lot of hybrid work, because I might do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'll probably function better on if I work from home on kind of Mondays and Fridays. So if you kind of tell your employer that, at least at the end of the day, the employer or the colleagues you work with, they can only say no. But if they don't know, how can you expect people to assume? And, a lot of women make assumptions. And especially, men now different, they're very verbal. They would just say it. And, okay, today the football is on. I'm just going to go
Mm,
watch the
yeah.
football, or I'll be away
Yeah.
from my meetings. And, that's very acceptable, because having a pint in the pub, watching football, okay, that's acceptable in society, in British society. Yes, that is acceptable. But women speaking about these things, I think once you start talking about it, other women would know, your line managers, even if it's a man, they would be more compassionate to it and make allowances. That doesn't mean you're going to slack at work or be less productive, but you're telling them, these are things that I do well, these are things that work for me. Especially with ADHD, is also the sensory processing. Some women find strong, bright lights very difficult. So, offices with strong lights, or it could be the heating or cooling in the office, especially if you're having hot flushes and then you're kind of brain fogged, and then the heating or cooling is not right, you're more focused on that rather than actually getting the work done. So, or it could be sensitivity to noises. You have to get on a tube to commute into work. So that sensory processing and that sensitivity, the heightened sensitivity to noise and sound and light and all those kind of things. So again, once you are aware, I think, it all starts with you. You can't blame it on the other person in front of you, because, once you are aware, you can try and explain it to someone, that someone could be your husband as well, or, someone could be
Mm,
your partner, your family members, and some of them might be very dismissive. No, you don't have ADHD. Because, some people think you're seeking a label and that's why you're talking about it. But, that might not be the case. You just need to know yourself better. But I
yeah.
think workplace adjustments coming to it, it could be, maybe HR, maybe it might be someone supportive, more senior, someone who you see as a mentor or a confidant you could speak to. But, some kind of workplaces, they have EAP, which is the employee assistance program. So they might have counselors they could speak to, because, a lot of women who get ADHD, they go into a slight phase of, kind of depression and grief, kind of post-diagnosis grief. So you might
Mm.
need someone, impartial you can speak to as well, who's objective, who has no agenda, so to speak.
Yeah, so that piece about speaking, being able to find someone who you're comfortable speaking to. And
Yeah.
then ultimately, it sounds like it's about the conversation, isn't it? Because everyone is going to be so unique in what they're
Yeah.
experiencing and what they have going on in their lives, that being able to, have the conversation, if you can, with your
Mm.
manager or with HR to get that support in place. That's kind of where the sort of most effective way of getting the support in the workplace that you
Yeah,
need.
it's both. Yeah, with ADHD, it's a very psychosocial thing. So there is a psychological help, but there's also a lot of it is the social aspect of it. So, so again, you need to combine the two in that kind of kind of factorial approach to things. You can't just look at one and say, you know what, you're take your ADHD meds and go. You can't just go
Yeah,
like that. So, and
yeah,
it's something you live with lifelong. So, getting an ADHD coach would probably be the best thing, because that's an accountability. They can kind of help you kind of, routines is one main thing that you struggle with, as a woman with ADHD. So, maybe having some sort of routine in the workplace, I know. So, some structure to it, although, so especially with freelancers, contractors, they're going to struggle because if they don't have that structure. So it's about that self-discipline, but
yeah,
also if you're employed, having some sort of routine helps with the ADHD brain and how
yeah.
it thinks and how it kind of achieves things as well. So it gives it that stability, it's less anxious, so it can perform better.
Yeah. And is that routine that you bring yourself or that you bring and also your workplace brings? Is it sort of a combination of both, is it?
I think you will have to know what works for you first. Because
Mm,
there's no point going and asking a manager, what do you think will work for me? How do I know? I mean, I mean, if you're 45, you know yourself better. You've known yourself for 45 years. And it's for you to kind of do a deep dive into,
yeah,
okay, what works for me? How do I function best? And this is even if you have ADHD or menopause or not, because, as an employee or, working in a workplace, you need to know what are your USPs, what are you good at, and what works well for you, because at the end of the day it's about the environment a lot in ADHD.
mm,
So again, knowing yourself and then able to kind of explain it, or at least it might be a negotiation. At the end of the day you might not get everything in one sitting, so that doesn't mean you're going to take your employer to the tribunal, or it's
yeah,
not a, that extremes of reactions is not what you need. You just go from one slow end of the spectrum to the other. It's, you're educating yourself, and at the
yeah,
same time you're educating your
yeah,
employer or colleagues. And and I think that it's a slow process. So, and
yeah,
again with family as well, you educated them slowly and explain, why is it there's so much food going rotten in the fridge. It's,
mm,
it's not because you don't know, you can see it, but all the washing has been hanging out for a week and you've not bothered to fold it. Laundry is a big thing with ADHD people. Women are not. So, but a lot of the housewives are the ones doing the laundry, not the men usually. So, if you see laundry, I mean, get someone to do the laundry, or I don't know, I mean, or have a system. You pick a day, okay, I'm going to do the laundry, fold it, dry it, that's it. So,
yeah,
small things which can derail you. So I think
yeah,
you're not interested in, no one's interested in doing laundry, most people are not. ADHD women probably are not at all. So it's
yeah,
like those simple things like knowing, okay, if I'm going to be late because I'm going to keep doing the laundry and I'm going to be late for a meeting, don't do the laundry then, pick another
mm,
time. Yeah.
yeah,
So again, small things, it's the small things I think that make the difference. It's,
yeah,
everyone thinks it's monumental changes. And, you could skip or shop from one employer to the other, but you carry the same problems with you because you're the common denominator in all this. So,
yeah, yeah. So it's that education, isn't it? And having those conversations.
yeah.
And
And
I
then
know that,
awareness.
and the awareness, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, if people are looking to build their own awareness, where can they go, or are you able to recommend some sites or some places where people can go to find information that is specific to menopause and ADHD?
You could start with the podcast recordings I have done. I mean,
Yeah.
I say that jokingly, but the reality is, there are very good resources on menopause, very good resources on ADHD. The overlap is an area, it's under research, more studies have to be done. So, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And, so I think it's finding kind of people who have either gone through it themselves or who treat people with it. Treat could be even in a coaching capacity. So, women who like coaches who work with women, kind of midlife women in perimenopause and ADHD, they would have at least have experiential knowledge to give you, and then if it's
Mm,
science backed and evidence backed, that would be even better. There's like magazines like The Attitude. It's a US based magazine. They do a lot of, you can subscribe to it. You can this release a lot of articles on kind of menopause, ADHD, or it could be like podcasts. Like I've done a few this year. So a lot of them tend to be American based because they tend to be, I don't know, I would say a head start on the overlap area. So on menopause, I would definitely say the UK does far better than the US. But I think when the overlap, I think it's getting there. It's a slow process, even with the clinicians educating patients, or clients. But the ones I did, like the ADHD for Smart as Women podcast, Tracy Otsuka, there's Linda Rogley. There's an ADHD Palooza they run every year for women. So, again, where you get resources and they tackle different elements like from time blindness to kind of hormones, lifestyle kind of modifications. So again, following people who are reliable, who are kind of evidence-based, who would look at the evidence as well, not just, you don't want people plucking things out of thin air. And people who have it themselves are even better, because then they've lived it to kind of tell the story, so to speak. So there are a few resources, and I on my socials, usually active on LinkedIn or Instagram, I tend to share things that I read about, which I think, okay, there's some evidence to it, or it could be anecdotal, but you put it in perspective, break it down, and it's again how you explain it in a matter or in a manner that's actually kind of understandable easily by these women. If there's a lot of medical jargon, women switch off, focus, inattention, and then you give them long articles to read full of medical jargon. That's it. You're not going to engage. So it's to kind of keep that engagement up, which is why I think the podcasts work very well for women with ADHD and menopause, because you see, I've had women say, they can put it on when they're doing the laundry or cooking or driving, or, whatever it is, they can switch off or on the train and they can still listen to it. Reading is a slightly different proposition. They need to have a bed, go for bedtime reading or be on holiday. The last thing you want to pick on holiday is something about menopause and ADHD. So I think podcasts are a very good resource generally, I would say, for women with ADHD, because I think it's the way they process it. They can just listen in their own time. They can stop and start. So they don't lose focus. And if you're bored, you can just stop and then come back to it later on. So
more difficult to wade through big documents, but actually podcasts, check out some of Susan's podcasts, that sort of medium.
I don't have my own podcast, but I've kind of been an expert speaker on some podcasts. But so, there are a lot of podcasts out there, but, I think listening is a less stressful way of educating, I find, because you're doing so many projects at work, you're always on the computer, on Zoom meetings. The last thing you want is that visual overstimulation. So you kind of, overdone the visual side. Your auditory side could, it's probably underused. So use it, I would say.
Use it. Yeah, I like that. This has been so enlightening, Susan. Thank you so much. Just thinking as we sort of close off the podcast for today, one sort of key takeaway message that you would leave those who are watching with.
I think getting the right help at the right time. Okay, that would be the gist of things, because you see, you could listen to thousands of podcasts, read hundreds of articles and journals and publications, look at so many books or booklets or ebooks or whatever. Nothing is personalized to you. So no one has the answer for you. So if you need a personalized plan for you, a personalized strategy for you, be it treating ADHD or diagnosing ADHD or treating menopause, perimenopause, how do the two overlap? You need it tailored to you, because there's only one of you, there's a unique you, and no one can write it down in a book or say about it on a podcast. So if you get the right help, they will let you or kind of guide you to kind of find those answers yourself. So getting the help, don't suffer. You don't need to suffer. You don't need to be ashamed. So get the right help. Don't sit on these things. Women like to read and listen to thousands of podcasts, but they don't get an answer. I get women saying, and this is coaching clients from the US, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, or they've listened to so many podcasts and books over the years, but they still don't have an answer, because the reason is because the podcast is not talking about them. It gives them a general overview, but to have a specific kind of plan for you, you need help, and you need the help from the experts. So I think, and don't try and self-diagnose, don't try and self-treat, and you don't want to be doing that. I think you need help. You can't do it alone.
Yeah, I love that to finish off on. So it's really, don't suffer, don't feel shamed by it, speak up, find somebody who can, tailor the support that's gonna absolutely help you. That is great. Thank you so much for joining us on Meno Musings today, Susan. It's really been a delight to have you.
The pleasure has been mine. Thank you very much.
So for those of you who would like to know more about what Susan does, perhaps have a conversation, get in contact with Susan and talk about coaching or other advisory services, how she can help you manage menopause alongside ADHD. I will make sure that I include all of Susan's details when I drop this podcast, so please do check those out. It was lovely to have you join us today, and I look forward to seeing you next month.